simply a transition to a different sphere of consciousness. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane.
Hello and welcome to episode 97 of the Talking to the Dead podcast. For nearly 3 years I've been doing this podcast. I've mentioned a very popular, particularly American religion, but also a religion that has a huge, branch, shop, church in Berlin as well, in the country that I'm living. It is, of course, Scientology. Now, Scientology is a subject that has been covered by a lot of documentaries, and many people have views on Scientology. My personal experiences with Scientology, I'll tell you about in a minute. But the reason I'm wanting to talk about it today is that it's come to me that I need to talk about it. It's something that I've mentioned many, many times throughout these episodes, because it's always interfering, if you like, with any discussion on religion, the occult, extraterrestrials, disclosure movement, or whatever you want. So it's so intertwined in a very mysterious and usually quite invisible way in our society. I'm not going to give you a kind of hit job on Scientology. That's not what I want to do. If you want to see that, you can see Louis Theroux, who did that really famous kind of hit job on that. There are a lot of people who've come out of Scientology who've also done hit jobs and contributed to writing books. Now, it's not my business to knock somebody's faith. I'm interested in what it's all about and how it links with talking to the dead. So briefly, my experience of Scientology. So just in the vein and of being fully disclosed here, I'm not a Scientologist. I have no interest in being a Scientologist, and so I'm not talking here from any form of propaganda. I'm not an ex-Scientologist at all. I don't know, to my knowledge, any Scientologists. What I want to say is that I came across Scientology for the first time in 1980 on a visit to the United States of America, where I was staying with my late uncle in San Diego, California. He was, if you like, a reformed alcoholic and drug abuser. He was, when I met him, a very upstanding member of society. He had already become a very prosperous and successful salesperson for Smith, Kline Beecham and Glaxo and Syntex and a number of very important American drug companies. And rather ironically, he was a salesman for selling drugs that helped people with pain and arthritis. In his private life, he was still maintaining his hobby of singing and playing guitar and writing music. And he did an awful lot of music that was being sold at various fairs for New Age thinkers. And New Age was really hitting the heights back then. He did that mainly because as a young man, he was a singer, but he, although reaching quite a lot of fame, he had a couple of number one hits in America in the 50s. He hit hard times, as a lot of these singers did, and he ended up going on the nightclub trail in order to try to get a bit of extra money. And inevitably, he told me, there was so much drugs and alcohol involved in playing in these nightclubs and so much time between playing gigs that he ended up getting really hooked on all sorts of stuff. My grandfather spent a lot of money sending him off to rehab centers, and finally he cleaned up. And by the time I'd met him in 1980, he'd been completely clean and sober for probably 10, 15 years. He was a really interesting man. Very movingly, when he did finally die of pancreatic cancer, I remember him sending a note to us all his relatives, asking us to pray for him for healing, saying that he wasn't going to have normal treatment for pancreatic cancer because he didn't believe in it. He believed in the power of positive thinking. He also invested in a lot of what you might call a crank cures that were being peddled in those days, such as various forms of activated water or particular types of crystals, which he believed, or he wanted to believe, would cure him of his pancreatic cancer. Of course, I'm fascinated in all of that stuff, so I did, and I really put a lot of thought into trying to help him and send him positive waves and stuff like that. But sadly, it got so bad that finally on the Christmas day, he just sat there with his family, and they all, knew that he had had enough, and he, with their blessing, he upped his morphine, which was a kind of an automatic thing, and passed away at Christmas in his chair with his family. It sounds a bit bleak, but maybe it wasn't such a bad way to go. But a lovely man, my Uncle Dean, and he was definitely one of the people who got me very much interested in psychic stuff, along with my mother. But why am I talking about Uncle Dean? Because he gave me the original book on Scientology. It was called Dianetics by L. Ron Hubbard. And he said that he thought much of it was very cranky, but he recommended that I read it. He was into reading all the latest books, like The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck, and various interesting New Age, religious themed as well, self-help books. So I read quite avidly L. Ron Hubbard's book on Dianetics. It obviously didn't do much for me, but I was interested in his theories. And then I moved to Switzerland after I finished my training, and I was walking along the Bahnhofstrasse in Zurich, and quite often you'd have groups of young men and women who would stop the passers-by and try to engage them in a conversation. They usually had the Dianetics books in their hands, and folders, and probably a couple of pamphlets. And I'd seen them up and down the Bahnhofstrasse and usually just ignored them. But one day, for some reason, I was inclined to actually stop and talk to them. And I was having quite an interesting discussion in the Bahnhofstrasse, and they invited me to go upstairs in an office building right behind where they were standing, where I knew they were going to try and thoroughly indoctrinate me and probably get me to try to join. But I was prepared for that, and even at the tender age of 24, I kind of knew about religions and these types of, if you like, as it was being presented to me as a cult, and what to look out for. And indeed, they did try to, really sell me L. Ron Hubbard and the concept of Dianetics. And I just listened and chatted, and eventually I politely made my excuses and left. I don't think they were that keen when I left. My next interest in Scientology came about probably in about 2003 or 4, when I was in the United States of America, and I made a particular effort to go and find the main Scientology church in Hollywood, the one that Tom Cruise and Nicolas Cage and all these very famous people. I think it's where Miss Carriage, who is the head of the Scientology unit now, it's where they're all based, and it's a massive thing. And when you look at it, you can't fail but to be impressed. It clearly, this is a very wealthy religion, and they are equally very welcoming if you go in, as long as you don't look like you're going to cause trouble. I don't think they have any great problems trying to get people to come through the door, and I did, and I went in, and I was allowed to go around this exhibition they had on the ground floor, where they obviously tried to use video, sound, and talking, and very low pressure, low cell techniques to try to get you to be interested in Dianetics. And what I particularly remember was a video that showed an accident at night with screaming ambulances, and somebody had obviously been hit or something. There was a car crash, and it was all very dramatic. And then, a calmer voice explaining this is where Dianetics can help, because, usually the car crashes or bad things that have happened to people in their life excite a particular memory, if you like. I think they call it an engram. And this is something that's been placed in you since way before your birth. And they can help get rid of these panic feelings, or even perhaps your propensity to harm yourself or to have bad memories that may be plaguing you. And they do that, as we will later on explain, through all sorts of mechanisms. But it was a very interesting hour or so I spent there. And as I did leave, yes, somebody did approach me and ask me if they could help me. Would I like to talk a bit more? And I politely said, no, thank you. I'm just really interested in seeing what it's all about. And they were very gracious and said, yeah, that's fine. If you want to come back anytime you like. The next time was when I was living in Germany, and I walked past one lonely, boring evening, the Scientology church in Berlin, and this time they wouldn't let me in. I think, to be honest, it was because Tom Cruise was in town. He was doing the premiere of one of his Mission Impossible movies, I think, and they were very, very hyped up about security by then. This was many, many years later, and I think they weren't so free and welcoming to let people into the building without an appointment. And I didn't have an appointment, so they said, I'm sorry, you can't come in. So I never got a chance to see that building. But I could see in the course of 1980 to probably then it was 2023, 24, Scientology had very much battened down the hatches, put up the walls, and was in real defense mode, because it had gone from being something that was celebrity interested to being almost an embattled religion that people were trying to ridicule. I think the final ridicule, of course, came when South Park did an episode. I think I talked about that before as well, and you can see it, and it's a real hit job, but very, very funny. Scientology stands as one of the most controversial and widely debated religious movements in the modern era now. It emerged in the mid-20th century, and it kind of reflects a unique convergence of psychology, spirituality, and self-improvement. And as I mentioned, it was founded by L. Ron Hubbard, and it presents itself not merely as a belief system, but as a very precise and methodical path towards their idea of spiritual enlightenment. Its adherents view it as a transformative technology for the mind and the spirit, and while critics often describe it as a little opaque, kind of cult-like, hierarchical, and very contentious. But unlike traditional religions, rooted in sort of ancient scripture and long-standing traditions, Scientology developed in a very modern context, and it was shaped by scientific optimism in the rocket era, and the growing interest in mental health, and a renewed curiosity about alternative spiritual frameworks. As a result, it has a very distinct position in the religious landscape, while it's simultaneously modern, certainly in its language and the things that people get up to, but ancient in its concerns with the nature of existence, consciousness, and our purpose as human beings on this planet. But to understand Scientology fully, you have to understand its doctrines. But also, there is an intellectual and cultural environment that it came from, and it's important to know a bit about that. They talk about controversies that, and these have been accompanying its growth, on consciousness, life after death, and even extraterrestrial existence. But they have probably created more notoriety for Scientology, and maybe have been quite positive in a way, because perhaps if they hadn't had such an interest in extraterrestrials and stuff, nobody would have heard of Scientology. Now, Scientology is completely inseparable from the life and the ideas of L. Ron Hubbard. And I've had a lot of experience with L. Ron Hubbard in terms of reading about him, seeing stuff about him, and seeing how he pops up in just about everything that's interesting in the occult world as well. But L. Ron Hubbard was known primarily as a prolific writer in those days, in the early days, of pulp fiction, and particularly science fiction. And his work often explored expansive and imaginative themes, which included distant worlds, advanced civilizations and the nature of human potential. There was a rather dreadful film starring John Travolta, who is also a Scientologist, and I think it was financed by him, that came out, I think, about 10 or 15 years ago. And I can't remember the title, but you can look it up in Google. And it was a filmed version of one of L. Ron Hubbard's science fiction novels. Now, within the narrative of Scientology, there is a cosmological dimension. In 1950, Hubbard published the seminal book, Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health. And that was the book that I was given in San Diego back in 1980. And by then, it had already become a bestseller. And it seemed like anybody who was interested in modern mental health was reading that book. Dianetics was the start, and eventually that would become Scientology. But it was a model of the human mind that divided it into two primary components: the analytical mind, which was responsible for rational thought, and the reactive mind, which stored traumatic experiences known as engrams. According to Hubbard, these engrams exerted a powerful, often unconscious influence over behavior, leading to psychological distress and irrational actions. And that was why I'm sure many of the videos that were being shown on a loop in the Scientology church in Los Angeles were showing usually traumatic things that had happened to someone, and then the results of using Dianetics to sort of have a breakthrough in mental health by almost getting rid of post-traumatic stress. However, Scientology gradually started receiving a lot of attention, and it encountered criticism from medical professionals, and it struggled with organizational and financial instability. In response, Hubbard gradually reframed his ideas within a broader spiritual context. By 1954, this transition had culminated in the establishment of Scientology as a religion as we know it now. This shift from therapy to spirituality marked a turning point, and rather than focusing solely on the elimination of psychological distress, Scientology began to address much deeper questions about identity, existence, the nature of the self, and central to this transformation was the introduction of the basic concept of Scientology, the thetan, which is an immortal spiritual entity that constitutes the true essence of the individual. Now, what has always interested me most about Scientology is rather like Freemasonry. It is founded basically on occult principles. And as with Freemasonry, the most famous occultist that I know of, Aleister Crowley, was involved right at the very start with L. Ron Hubbard, as he was in the translation of various rites that he used in I believe, the Scottish rite of Freemasonry. Now, if that is not a warning to you that if you get the most famous, the most prolific occultist involved in your religion, do you honestly think you're going to get anything other than probably Thelema, which was Crowley's own self-composed belief, and you're going to get mixtures of the OTO, which is the Golden Dawn and all those British-based occult movements. You're going to get all of that mixed up into your religion, whether you know it or not. And to this day, of course, Scientology and Freemasonry has a whole secret side that you only get to know about if you progress very high up the various levels. So even if, as a an apprentice Mason, I think they're called in Freemasonry, or if you're just starting at the various levels of Scientology, you may not be aware of the occult roots. But as you progress and you learn more of these esoteric secrets, it's without any doubt to me that the influence of the occult is going to be showing itself. So, although Scientology certainly presents itself as a very distinct and modern system, it really has emerged within an environment that includes all these long-standing traditions of Western esotericism. And Aleister Crowley had popularized these systems of spiritual development that were centered on hidden knowledge and ritual practice and personal transformation. And Crowley's philosophy of Thelema, with its emphasis on discovering one's true will, reflected a very much greater trend toward individualized spirituality and the pursuit of higher consciousnesses. Maybe something that is still debated is the connection that Hubbard appears to have had with Jack Parsons, who we have discussed in a few episodes back. And Jack Parsons, as you might remember, was a pioneering rocket scientist and a devoted follower of Crowley and deeply involved in the occult as a member of the OTO, or the Ordo Templi Orientis, during the 1940s. And Hubbard spent a lot of time with Parsons and was exposed to aspects of his ritual work and esoteric worldview. They were even involved together in one of the most famous rituals that Aleister Crowley had, maybe invented is the wrong word, but adapted. And that was to try to materialize a scarlet woman. Now, it is well recognized that L. Ron Hubbard was very, very familiar with Parsons and was involved in these occult things. Although I believe the Scientology Church now tries to either distance or reframe the relationship that L. Ron Hubbard had with Parsons, and of course, indeed with Crowley himself. But certainly without doubt that L. Ron Hubbard, like a lot of people, was fascinated by the esoteric, and was obviously a very seeking soul. He was looking to find some true meaning beyond established religions that involved consciousness, that involved the esoteric, and maybe something perhaps that he could use in his mind that was creating what would eventually become Dianetics and Scientology. Certainly, the aspects of the occult that L. Ron Hubbard seems to have taken into Scientology are the spiritual transformation ideas, and also the emphasis on making a system out of it all, where occult traditions usually rely on symbolic ritual and you interpreting things in a certain way to make things happen. Scientology was presenting its practices as a very precise, repeatable, and, if you like, scientific method process. And this shift from the symbolic to procedural spirituality represented a very considerably new and significant adaptation for the modern age. Now, the core beliefs of Scientology, the center of Scientology, is a fundamental claim about the nature of human existence, that the true self, in the Crowley-Thelema sense, is not the body or even the mind, but an immortal spiritual entity known as the thetan. That concept obviously redefines consciousness in a radical way, and it fits in very much with all the things that I've covered in my podcast for at least the last year, that consciousness is not just resident within us, it's also without of us, and it's also a concept that shows perhaps that human beings are far more than just their individual selves. The idea that we as humans are, again, just a container for something very, very much greater than the human body. So this thetan, this concept, does redefine consciousness. So rather than consciousness emerging from our own biological processes, perhaps in the brain, consciousness is definitely understood as primary and independent. And the body becomes this vehicle, and the mind is a tool, and it's used by the thetan. This perspective places Scientology in complete opposition to the normal materialist interpretations of consciousness, which of course locate awareness within the brain. Instead, Scientology aligns much more closely with the philosophical and Eastern thought standards, while maintaining its own distinct terminology and structure. The human mind in Scientology is divided into functional components. The analytical mind operates rationally and consciously, while the reactive mind stores what are called engrams, which are recordings of traumatic experiences that continue to influence behavior long after the original event has passed. Now, these engrams are not merely memories that perhaps psychologists could work with in post-traumatic stress therapy, or EMDR therapy as it's called. Within Scientology, they are actually seen as much more active and aggressive forces that totally distort one's perception and decision-making. The process of getting these things addressed and dealing with them is called auditing. And during auditing sessions, an individual is guided through a series of questions intended to uncover and process engrams. Now, during this process, clearly, a lot of personal information will be provided by the person, and that is often recorded on tape, or perhaps digitally these days, as well as written down. And that has led to a lot of allegations that spirituality is sort of subverted by Scientology into a cult system that blackmails people to keep going and not to leave the organization. Because if they do, it's been alleged, the information that has been gathered, which could be, if you're a famous person particularly, quite destructive and maybe even career-ending, or maybe even illegal. So it's obviously a very slightly worrying point of view from a data protection point of view that a religion would specialize in getting as much information about you as possible, usually the things that may be not your most desirable characteristics, and keep a permanent record of them, while saying it was necessary to find all that information in order to clean you out, to audit you, to get rid of the engrams. Now, the way that they get these engrams and process them is that they use a proprietary electronic device known as an e-meter, which is said to assist in identifying areas of emotional charge. And through repeated sessions with these e-meters, the individual can eliminate, apparently, the influence of the reactive mind and achieve a wonderful state known as clear. Again, I must just tell you from personal experience that when I read about the e-meter, and I think it was quite thoroughly described in the book Dianetics, I tried to make one because essentially, as I remember, all it was two tin cans connected with wires to a meter, electrical meter, like you might use to help you with electronics, to find voltages, resistances. And I can't remember exactly what setting I put the meter on, but essentially it would perhaps measure slight fluctuations in resistance as you held them. And these fluctuations were obviously similar to the ones that are used in their e-meter, and were very, very important in helping them identify what was a true engram. You could say a similar technology is used as part of modern lie detector systems. Very interested in what currents go through the human body and what fluctuates if you're lying or telling the truth. Now, after you've been made clear for your engrams, you can move through to a series of very advanced levels that are known as the operating thetan, or OT stages. And these levels claim to offer progressively greater awareness and control, and extending beyond the limitations of ordinary human experience. Now, this is where again it gets very sensitive to me, and it's worth being very careful about how I describe this. But the key ideas here are beliefs that are associated with advanced teachings and interpretations within Scientology. It's something that perhaps is not universally accepted by Scientologists or even the people who've done exposés of Scientology. But essentially, this is what apparently is happening. And these are the most debated aspects, if you like, of Scientology when you get to its highest levels. These operating thetan or OT stages, these advanced levels, describe a state in which an individual, understood as a thetan, regains his abilities that are said to have been able to transcend ordinary human limitations. Now, while the Church of Scientology often presents these ideas in a very careful or symbolic term, now, very central to these claims is that the idea that a thetan, in its fully realized state, is not bound by the physical constraints of the material universe. And according to Scientology doctrine, the limitations experienced by human beings are not inherent, but rather the result of accumulated engrams or past traumas and long-term spiritual degradation. And these are impediments that can be removed through the auditing system, and you can progress up to what is called the bridge to total freedom. The thetan then is believed to recover aspects of its original power. Now, some interpretations of advanced Scientology teachings suggest that these recovered abilities may include forms of direct influence over physical things, the physical world. And this has led to claims that highly advanced individuals, and here we're probably talking the Tom Cruises of this world, might be capable of affecting matter, energy, space, or even time through intention alone. Now, I have no knowledge whether Tom Cruise can do that, but if what people say about Scientology is true, and this is all alleged, the possibilities of opening your mind to being able to do incredible things are available to you if you complete higher levels of Scientology. Now, this is precisely, of course, what Thelema and what happens in Masonry, what happens in the occult, and all esoteric teachings do. They all are trying to help you make things happen. This is what, if you like, witches were doing. It's the ability to change the physical material world in a way that you wish it to be. It's where the line between religion and the occult gets incredibly hazy. Because again, of course, in traditional religions, where you're going into various states of altered consciousness, or you're praying or meditating, you're also asking for change or help in your physical world. So this is not unusual in religious belief, but it is a bit unusual that a Scientologist would learn to change the physical world in such a scientific and direct way. Now, as some of you know from my previous podcasts where we've talked about the Ordo Templi Orientis and Aleister Crowley, He was a very advanced practitioner and was said to achieve mastery over all sorts of hidden forces and dimensions of reality. And in all of these traditions, the goal is often described as gaining some form of alignment with a deeper will or universal principle, thereby enabling a form of influence that really transcends ordinary life. Scientology, however, kind of reframes these concepts in a much more systemized and procedural language, presenting them as the outcomes of specific training and auditing processes rather than a ritual or symbolic practice. Now, skeptics could argue that these claims lack any real empirical scientific support and reflect just a sort of a metaphorical language taken literally. And from that perspective, these reported abilities, such as influencing matter or transcending time, are perhaps better understood as interpretations of psychological states. It may be a little bit more like taking some form of hallucinogenic drug. But for many adherents, the emphasis is less of an extraordinary power, but more on a personal development. And this is probably where Scientology does its best work and is probably most well known amongst its adherents. It's there as a system to help people who have gone through terrible calamity. It helps people have clarity of thought. It gives them the chance to have an improved capacity to navigate the trials of life. The more dramatic claims often emerge at the intersection of the internal doctrine and individual interpretation and external critique. But ultimately, this aspect of Scientology highlights a much broader problem, if you like, within many spiritual traditions. And that's the question of how far human potential can extend beyond known physical limits. Now, this is something that is not, as I said, just limited to Scientology. Even if you're studying the ongoing disclosure of UFOs and President Trump's imminent disclosure that we're not alone and that we're being visited and have always been visited by non-human intelligences. If all of this comes to view very quickly, people will soon realize that the human potential is probably so much greater than they've ever believed before. And maybe this will probably significantly help Scientology's reputation as both a system of self-improvement and a source of ongoing controversy. Now, Scientology's understanding of life and death, which is of course very interesting to my podcast, follows directly from its concept of the thetan, because the thetan is immortal. Death is not an end, but a transition. The body may cease to function, but the thetan continues to exist, carrying with it all the accumulated experiences of countless past lives. So reincarnation is therefore a central element of Scientology. Individuals are thought to have lived many previous existences, and the effects of these lives are believed to persist in the form of engrams. These past life influences can shape your present behavior in subtle but significant ways. And the ultimate goal of Scientology is not merely to improve one's current life, but to achieve a level of spiritual awareness that transcends the cycle of birth and death. Now, at higher levels, practitioners are said to gain much greater control over their existence as thetans, moving toward a state of true spiritual autonomy. One of the most distinctive and controversial aspects of Scientology is its, if you like, cosmology. Now, unlike traditional religions that focus primarily on human history, Scientology situates humanity within a vast and ancient universe populated by numerous civilizations. And according to its teachings, the thetan predates human existence by millions or even billions of years, and humanity in this framework is only a recent development in a much larger cosmic narrative. At an advanced level, Scientology introduces accounts involving extraterrestrial civilizations and events that are said to have shaped the spiritual condition of beings on Earth. Among the most widely discussed of these is the story of Xenu. He's a figure associated with the, if you like, catastrophic event that is the basis of Scientology in the distant past. These teachings are typically restricted to very advanced members and are not emphasized in introductory materials. As a result, they're often misunderstood or presented in distorted ways to the public, but for adherents, they form part of a larger framework of understanding the origins of spiritual limitation and the path to liberation. But again, you have to be very careful about discussing this because Scientology is directly borrowing so much of this script from Freemasonry and from the Ordo Templi. And if you like, most of the information that is being given at these very high levels that apparently cost a lot of money to take if you're a member of Freemasonry. These deeper understandings within Scientology can, as I said, be linked very, very clearly to Freemasonry and the Ordo Templi Orientis OTO. And these systems offer a doctrine with historical origin and institutional purpose. And all of this is strikingly similar to the occult. The idea of the concept of progressively revealing things to you is also something that is very common in esoteric teaching and is central to Scientology. In Freemasonry, for instance, the teachings are never presented all at once, but are gradually disclosed through a series of degrees, and each stage introduces new symbolic material, new moral lessons, and new ways of interpreting them. And the same with the OTO, which, as I said, was influenced very heavily by the teachings of Aleister Crowley. And it structures its systems around graded initiations through which members encounter increasingly complex and esoteric doctrines. Now, Scientology mirrors this exactly through its bridge to total freedom. And foundational texts, such as the Dianetics book, which are publicly available, are there, but there are very much more advanced materials, particularly those associated with the operating thetan levels. And these are restricted to members who have progressed through earlier stages. And this layered access to knowledge creates a scriptural hierarchy in which understanding is contingent upon advancement. And it's a feature that is shared across all these three traditions. I've actually managed to download a few years ago some of Scientology's leaked documents at this level, the operating thetan level, and I think they have names like Sea Org and various other things. And they are not merely texts to be interpreted, but manuals, and they are letters from L. Ron Hubbard and memos to his adherents on how things should be conducted. They're very procedural, and he seems to be the supreme leader in all of this, telling people how things should be interpreted and mustn't be interpreted in any other way than the way that he has decided that they should be done. Now, that, I'm sure, was very similar with Aleister Crowley. And now a further similarity can be seen in the use of a very specialized language and symbolic systems. With Freemasonry, it employs architectural metaphors like tools and like the square and the compass to convey moral and philosophical ideas. The OTO was drawing on Hermeticism that we've talked about before, and the Kabbalah and ritual magic, and it utilizes very dense symbolic vocabulary intended to encode layers of meaning. Now, Scientology, while much less overtly symbolic, developed its own teaching lexicon, including terms such as thetan, engram, and auditing, and this specialized language serves a very similar purpose. It creates an internal framework through which members can interpret their experiences and it kind of reinforces a boundary between insider and outsider. Now, rather like Freemasonry is not liked by the Catholic Church, and in fact, I understand that it's still the case that you cannot become a Freemason if you are a member of the Catholic faith. But Scientology's relationship with other religions is very complex. Officially, it presents itself as compatible with existing faith, suggesting that individuals can retain their religious identities while participating in Scientological practices. However, in practice, Scientology offers a comprehensive worldview that can completely function independently of other traditions. It does contain themes of established religions, such as the immortality of the soul or the importance of ethical behavior and the possibility of spiritual advancement. But at the same time, its methods and cosmology set it apart, creating a distinct identity that's never really completely aligned to any form of religion. If you look again at a comparison between Scientology and Freemasonry, since modern Freemasonry comes from the same sort of roots, they are very structured similarities there that show this direct influence. Both systems have this hierarchical model of advancement in which knowledge is revealed, and members must progress through defined steps in order to gain access to deeper teachings as they advance. But both systems emphasize personal transformation and ethical development. However, significant differences remain. Freemasonry is largely symbolic and decentralized, while Scientology is very doctrinal and highly centralized. And these distinctions, I think, are very important in highlighting the importance of seeing similarities within a broader context. The Church of Scientology operates as a global organization, and following L. Ron Hubbard's death in 1986, the leadership passed to David Miscavige, who continues to play a very central role in maintaining the doctrinal consistency and organizational control. Within this structure, the so-called Sea Org, or Sea Organization, represents a very elite group whose members commit themselves to the church with a very high level of dedication. And the organization as a whole is characterized by a strong emphasis on discipline, loyalty, standardization, secrecy, and adherence to established procedures. But all of this has led to Scientology having history of significant controversy. Back in the 1970s, when certain members infiltrated the US government agencies to remove unfavorable records, the operation resulted in all sorts of criminal convictions and intensified tremendous scrutiny from the authorities. And Scientology has engaged in extensive legal efforts to secure recognition as a religion to defend itself against criticism. And supporters argue that such actions are necessary to protect their religious freedom. However, critics see it as very aggressive and disproportionate. Some aspects of the legal means by which Scientology goes through in defense of its members are discussed as being legitimate, while others consider it to be almost trying to close any form of research or investigation down. So, really, I would say that Scientology is a very complex and multifaceted movement. It defies any simple categorization. It's, on one hand, particularly interesting because it helps people. It's not the same for all people, much like Freemason. It depends on how involved you get. I'm sure the same could be said again about the occult and worshipping Lucifer or the Church of Satan or any of these other things that people might have very strong views about. It all depends on how far you get involved into it. The normal man and woman in the street, probably who's a member of Scientology or a member of Freemason, he probably has no idea of what's going on above them. But the reality is that these systems are designed as a form of ritual, and they have a purpose, which is either to release hidden knowledge or to allow the hidden powers of the human mind to be used for the gain of the individual while he's alive. Then you can also argue none of this comes without some form of cost. And as we've discussed before, the religious interpretation would mean that you're making a pact. And if you're making a pact with the devil, you are inevitably going to have to do some payback. And the payback, if you are a Christian, is always terrible. It's never worth what you get in return, because in return you're giving up your immortal soul. And that is everything you are. And if you give that up just for a little bit of fun in your life and a bit of success or money or whatever else, that clearly cannot be a good deal. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I've tried to be as open-minded as I can. I know why I felt it necessary to do this episode now, because I personally believe, and you don't have to believe me, but I personally believe that what is going to be revealed by President Trump in the next few weeks, and Kash Patel, the head of the FBI, even said yesterday that all the documents that are going to be released, which I'm sure are by no means all the documents that are classified, are going to be released, and he's got them already out there, including videos and God knows what. All of that stuff, when it comes out, if you believe the whistleblowers and if you believe the community, are saying that it's going to shock the world. There's been even a discussion that I've read about, and I've seen videos about, and it's been on mainstream media as well, that the government of the United States, who is releasing this information, have already done meetings with very senior clerics of religions in order to prepare them for the release of this information. And you would ask yourself, why? Well, a number of these clerics have, of course, already jumped the gun, and they're going out there and saying, what's going to be released is information that there are interdimensional beings that live amongst us and have always lived amongst us. And the clerics are interpreting it, as I mentioned in my previous episode, the way they would, that this is satanic, that these are the Nephilim from the Book of Enoch. These are perhaps interdimensional beings that have a connection to the fallen angels of the Bible and represent, if you like, Satan and his minions. So the satanization of interdimensional beings and non-human intelligence seems to be the way that some religious people are going to take this. I personally do not believe any of that. I cannot believe that that's seriously going to be the end result of all of this disclosure. But to religious people, it perhaps fulfills that prophecy, and that's how they'll see it. And perhaps that's the nature of a disclosure, is that depending on your worldview and your belief system, you will interpret it in a particular way. Scientists will interpret it as modern intelligence and scientific advancement that they can learn from. Religious people might see it as something to be terrified from, because it links directly to their religious interpretations and the sense of end times and satanic control. I hope it won't be that, of course, but it is interesting that already there is an increasing religious dimension to alien disclosure. And from the point of view of my podcast, which talks about the evidence of life after death and the proof that there is no death, the disclosure, if such a news is to be believed, sounds incredibly similar to Scientology. Now, quite what Scientology knew that was going on, I don't know. But L. Ron Hubbard, whatever he was, he seemed to have got a tremendous amount of information, hidden information, secret information, that he turned into his religion, Scientology. But I'm sure the people involved in the establishment of Freemasonry and Aleister Crowley, in terms of the OTO, and Thelema would say the same. In fact, all occult people would say that they have that access to hidden knowledge that is going to reveal the ultimate truth of who we are and what we are and how we came to be here in the first place. It's very exciting times. Yes, I know there are people out there who are saying once we know this information, it's going to totally unglue society. I don't think so at all. I think we're far too mature for that. As I said, it might cause some problems for people who are deeply scientific and cannot accept anything other than Einstein's physical realities, or it might upset people who are very religious, who absolutely fundamentally feel that any attack, if you like, or suggestion that theirs is not the exclusive, they may get funny. But for you and I in the street, I hope there'll just be a lovely, warm shower over us of knowledge and comfort that the truth is finally out there, that we're not alone, we've never been alone, and there is no death. And, all the things that I've been talking about in the last 3 years of my podcast will be proved. And maybe that's going to be better for humanity. Maybe things will get better and all these wars will stop. People will learn to live with each other, and all the hunger, all the violence, all the sadness will be replaced, hopefully, by love. And who could ask for better? Thank you.